Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alison Stewart and I'm the CEO of Ep.4 and I'm your host for this episode of Cut the Crop. And we're going to talk about pea weevil today. And we've got Karen Williams with us. And Karen, of course, is very well known to the arable industry. She's the Arable Chair group of the Federated Farmers. She's a Wairarapa farmer, and she's been actively involved in the pea weevil eradication response. Hello, Karen.
Good morning, Alison.
Yeah, thank you for being with us today.
No, thanks for asking. It's an exciting piece of news, so it's great to be able to share with Ep.4 and Ep.4's listeners.
So, Karen, had you actually ever heard of pea weevil before this incursion?
No, absolutely not. So, a couple of phone calls sort of early on with other people in the industry sort of saying, have you heard anything about a pea weevil? I think there's something being discovered, and it was all a bit of an unknown for everyone that was sort of involved in those conversations. But obviously it soon became a very familiar expression and has dominated certainly a large part of the last 4 years.
So how did you initially hear about it and how did you get involved in it?
Yeah, sure. So those early murmurings and then I think it was a phone call. I certainly was talking to Nick Pike, your predecessor at Ep.4, about it, and then I was approached by what was then the Ministry for Primary Industries before they were Biosecurity New Zealand, and I had been nominated, I think, to sit on the governance group, which was making decisions about the response, how we would deal with it. All the implications of that with funding, different approaches, options for management, etc. So, yeah, that was sort of, I think that's first discovered in March in the nuts and vegetable seed store, and I think probably those conversations started kicking off about April, May.
And so tell us a little bit about the pea industry up in the Wairarapa and why it was so important to sort of address this issue. Yeah,
sure. So, we're a small geographic area, I suppose, but there's some pretty passionate arable farmers up here, and we've got some great cropping soils, a good climate for growing peas in particular, and and access to water. So some really key geographical features that make doing this really well. So I think in about the last time we collected data on growing stats before the incursion, we had about 1,200 hectares of peas, both seed peas and feed peas in the Wairarapa. And it certainly was the crop that was yielding the best price per tonne produced. So it was the shining light financially, if you like. It also was, it's a great fits in the crop rotation really well, and the nitrogen fixing has those other added values that aren't easily quantified. So when pea weevil came along, and there was initially a series of options of how we might manage this, and eventually the technical advisory group advised and said, look, we think we've got a chance at eradicating this. And so in governance, we looked at the various options. I think there was 4 options put on the table to start with, including just a regional ban around when they're being found, 5K, 10K, etc. But we soon worked out that was never going to be feasible. How would we control farm machinery and things coming in and out of that zone, and could have weevil hitchhiking out to what we considered to be the clear zone? So governance formed the view that a regional growing ban through the Wairarapa was the way forward, and that's in fact what was done. But that was initially set for 2 years, and that was a really bitter pill for local growers to swallow, really, to take their shining light out of the cropping equation. So
And
obviously
that, Karen, I mean, I can recognise that would have been a really big deal for the growers up there. How did they discuss it amongst themselves, and how did you and the MPI team work through that whole issue of, sort of putting a ban on growing peas up there?
Yeah, it was. It was a huge deal. And so we, a number of sort of groups formed, I suppose. So I was on governance with the MPI, and then we also formed a stakeholder group, mostly led by Richard Kershaw, grower from Martinborough, and really ably supported by Jamie Falloon, who was the provincial president for Federated Farmers at that time. And both those guys put in a power of work, along with some others as well. But they sort of certainly led the charge with meetings. And we had a grower and all industry meeting in Greytown, and that was before the ban had been put in place. And it was, you could certainly say, a pretty testy meeting. We had growers there trying to hold on to growing peas, but of course very aware that we had this new incursion. And then we had a lot of industry people out of Canterbury sitting there too, and strongly advocating for the regional growing ban, so that things, so that we could assure them that we wouldn't see the pea weevil tracking on down to Canterbury.
So obviously in that first year, there was a lot of interest in what was going to be the outcome of the first year of, putting the ban in place. The growers must have been rather nervous sort of in that first year, working out whether the plan of attack was really working or not.
Yeah, and the really difficult thing, Alison, was that they were discovered in March in the nuts and vegetable seeds, but during that period before and during until MPI got control over it, there was pea straw going around the country, there was pea seed going around the country, and pea offal, up to the Waikato, down to Canterbury, and in between. So to get growers' heads around that we could put a regional growing ban on in the Wairarapa, which would severely affect them, we wouldn't be doing it anywhere else, but it may have already gone everywhere else. So it was a pretty big leap of faith for them. So when we embarked on that, obviously surveillance was implemented around the rest of the country as well. That was undertaken by MPI and their contractors, and over a 2-year period, no weevil was found to have escaped. So that was really great news, and so I guess you could say area freedom was sort of declared everywhere outside the Wairarapa after 2 years.
So Karen, I mean, just talk through what the process is with respect to MPI sort of dealing with, an incursion and deciding to respond by banning a crop. Obviously there is a level of compensation that's given to the growers. How does that whole issue of working out compensation and the process by which the growers can access that compensation?
Yeah, sure. So it was very much an evolving process because it was new ground for MPI as well. So in my role on governance, to MPI's credit, I felt they really listened to me. There was certainly it was hard at times because a lot of our conversations I was on just speakerphone in their meetings, and the rest of them were all in the same room in Wellington. But with some good cheering, they certainly listened to my concerns. And whilst I officially had the observer status on there, I felt like I could be influential, and I said to them that very much supported the growing ban, because if we have a shot at eradication, we should give it our best shot, but we needed to put a measure of support around growers. And I kind of identified that in 3 key areas. One of them was compensation, and I'll talk about that some more, and just the challenges we had with getting that across the line. The second one was we needed to somehow gather some funding together so we could look at doing an alternative cropping strategy. And that was more of a strategic view that we can't be solely reliant on the success of peas. We need to broaden our cropping variety so that we have other things if there were any other incursion in a particular crop species. And then the third was about getting they're mostly Canterbury based seed companies to, okay, if we're not going to grow peas up here, 1,200 hectares, what alternative options could you give us, and perhaps, do a bit of a trade with Canterbury. So those were the three key areas, and there was a lot of conversations and a lot of work behind getting those things established.
I mean, so you're really saying that, the pea growers up in the Wairarapa, really took one for the team on this, and do you think that the rest of the industry sort of fully understand and recognise, the contribution that the pea growers have made?
Hard to know, Alice. I'd like to think they do. It was a difficult time when you see people, based in Canterbury speaking in Farmers Weekly, or have come up here to the meeting and saying, you guys have got to have a ban, so that we don't end up with it as well. So it was an interesting dynamics in the room, that was for sure. I think, the Wairarapa guys did take a hit for the industry recognition. It was unfortunate we didn't see certainly very many other crop options offered to our growers, and that's probably been the most disappointing part of the process. And I guess now we can rectify that. We need to bring peas back, but we certainly want a range of different crop options. So, this is me, I guess, calling out to the rest of industry to say, come and back the Wairarapa growers. They've done the hard yards for the last 4 years. Come up with some good crop options, and we'll grow you some good crops.
So obviously this is a success story. So just talk about what's been happening in the last sort of few months and the great result that's come out of this.
Yeah, sure. No, this is an amazing success story, and we hosted Minister Damien O'Connor here on Monday to make the announcement, and as Minister for Biosecurity. And I actually want to recognise former Minister Nathan Guy, because he was very accessible to me in those first couple of years when we were really struggling to get some form of compensation across the line for growers. What the problem was, the Biosecurity Act only provided for the destruction of a crop. So when we burned our pea straw that we had in storage, that was compensated. What it didn't provide for legally was not being able to grow something. So we had a lot of toing and froing with the MPI about how we could capture that and ensure that growers were no worse off, because that was kind of the mantra in the legislation, that growers would be no worse off. So eventually we landed on something called an ex gratia payment, and that was outside the Act, but kind of implemented with the spirit of the Act. And so growers needed to grow an alternative crop or some grazed livestock, and you that amount that you yielded over the 4 years of the ban was pretty much worth less than the peas, and then the MPI would make an ex gratia payment for the difference. And so that's kind of how that worked out.
And it's always a situation, isn't it, Karen, when something like this happens, that the policies and procedures put in place don't necessarily capture all of the eventualities, and you do have to be prepared to sort of come up with alternative solutions. So there have been a lot of good lessons to be learnt from this for other incursions that may come along at some stage in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of important lessons, and I have debriefed with the MPI, so I'm really hopeful that those lessons have been captured in the right form and they can be rolled out again should we face another incursion. So it was it was a real learning experience, and the trap crop. I probably haven't touched on the trap crop regime, but that was about surveillance of around the Wairarapa region over the 4-year period. So in year 0 was when the weevils were found in the seed store. Year 1, we put some trap crops around the region, or just in more of it where they'd been found, and we trapped over 1,700 weevil. The following year, trap crops on 2 sites, so significantly reduced, only 15 weevil were found. And then year 3, 0, and then of course this year we've just finished year 4, 0 weevil found again. So that gave us 2 years of the entire region having no weevils found, and that gives us what we call area freedom, and enables MPI to lift the ban. And that's pretty exciting for New Zealand, and I hope the rest of the country gives the local growers the recognition they deserve.
So this is actually a world first, isn't it? I mean, we tend to use that term world first far too often, but the reality is this is actually the first time that a country has been able to eradicate pea weevil.
Yes, that's my understanding, Alison. Yeah, so obviously, we had a few key things at play. We moved pretty quickly. We chose the full regional ban rather than mucking around with a smaller ban. Geographically, I guess we're quite isolated with hills around all of our borders. But, as I said earlier, a lot of pea product had left the Wairarapa. So, the risk of it having spread seemed enormous at the time. So maybe there was a little bit of luck going our way as well.
Well, there's always luck sort of in these things, and you have to take it when it comes along. So what's happening now? I mean, it's been sort of like formally announced that it's been eradicated. So what does that mean for the growers? And is MPI going to continue to have an involvement with the growers?
Yes, so the regional growing ban has been lifted. So everyone in the region can now grow peas, and that includes all our home gardeners who are really elated. And it also means that our gardeners will get pea straw back on their gardens, which has been sorely missed. What the Technical Advisory Group recommended and governance approved, and it's a very sensible idea, is that in a 5K radius around that hot spot, so it's just an area just east of Masterton where the last of the weevil were found, they will continue to do active surveillance and sweeping of peas through next year's pea season, just to see, and sent off to the lab again just as a double check that they're gone. And also they'll do some soak testing, which is just a simple test where you soak the peas in water and, the weevil does come out if they're in fact in there. But, those growers in that area can still grow peas. They can still, sign up to contracts and things. So it's no impediment on them. It's just a sort of belts and braces approach.
Yeah, so that's fantastic news. In all of this, and I mean, you've been involved in sort of it from day one. What do you think is the biggest lesson that's been learnt from all of this that you think that we can take forward?
Yeah, probably two key things, and that is protecting our border. That's fundamental. And we, through this early days, we argued very strongly for mandatory fumigation at our borders for pea seeds, particularly where it was coming from areas known to have pea weevil. That just seemed high risk to us. So big message, protect our border. And that's every New Zealander, and that's certainly what Biosecurity New Zealand pushes in terms of messaging, is that every New Zealander has to take a responsibility for not bringing anything in when they're returning from travel, they're importing things, or they're just buying, internet shopping. You see something in your package that shouldn't be there, call the 0800 number and let Biosecurity know. So that's the first part. The second part is really, it's about the team approach to success. And, this was very much a team of MPI and industry and growers and, needing to communicate well and treating everyone respectfully. It was a painful process for people. It was really tough times. And including for MPI as well, their staff were under enormous pressure. The compensation team was more or less didn't even exist before our incursion, and so then it was staff from a handful of people, and then of course Mycoplasma bovis came along, and there was an enormous pressure for compensation. And I know our growers felt a bit neglected for a while as all the focus went on M. bovis. But MPI have learnt a lot and have evolved and expanded that compensation team enormously, and they've certainly picked up their processing times. So, communication, using the media effectively, thanking people is also really critical. I've certainly have recognised the local growers for what they've done, but the local residents have been amazing too. They've gone without peas for 4 years and pea straw, and they've actually been really vigilant if they've seen someone else growing peas or spreading pea straw around, and that 0800 number is being used quite frequently. And I've had a number of calls over the 4-year period, as well as people just approaching me in the supermarket and really interested in, have we done it or are we nearly done it? And so there's been some a real collective success, which is not common and is really nice to celebrate.
And it's a lovely way to finish off the interview. I think that thanking the peat growers in the Wairarapa on behalf of the industry is absolutely something that I would like to do. And thank you, Karen, for giving us a really good insight into what happened. And I guess we can all celebrate the success. So thank you very much, Karen.
No, thank you, Alison. And thanks for all the work that Foundation for Arable Research does. We work closely, Federated Farmers, with you and with growers, and, the extension work you do, and in particular, focusing on our next challenges is really, really important. So, thanks again.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to the listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.